Hey, time out here. Unnecessary roughness. Hey, how many times have you started an IV and you were unsuccessful? What are we doing wrong here? You know, there was a study done in 2005 by Jacobson and Winslow, and they stated out of the nurses they studied, only 77% of the nurses were successful in their initial attempt at an IV. I can show you how to be a bit better. On the Great Z's website, ZMD, in April 21st, 2011, he stated that nothing can cause us as much anxiety as that difficult IV insertion. Patients and nurses alike, anxiety. Well, unfortunately, patients judge us on our abilities to start an IV. Now, even those who are not in the medical field, you're going to appreciate this presentation because you will learn the ideal place for that IV for your situation as a patient. Now, Martha Nelson, she's a columnist for the Huffington Post, and in May 13th, 2013, she described her experience as a patient. She underwent a total knee replacement. And that very next morning, she woke up in excruciating pain. She was nauseated, and she realized, hey, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom here. Well, my question is, how are you going to ambulate with a walker with an IV right in the crook of your wrist here? My name is Janet Hill, and I've been a registered nurse for over 20 years with experience that includes trauma, surgery, chemotherapy, and most recently I've been instructing nurses to start IVs. You know, there can be many challenges when you're starting an IV in a difficult adult patient. And today I'm going to discuss the most common factors that can influence your IV insertion. To reinforce this information, I'm going to demonstrate as I go to reinforce. Now, first, let's get rid of Fred and bring in a real patient. Here we have an African American male who is heavily tattooed. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a scenario. He is going to be a patient undergoing a total knee replacement. All right? Now, in 2006, Gomella and Haste's reference books state that you do have to assess the procedure that the patient's undergoing. You have to figure out how long they're going to stay in the hospital. Because when you figure that out, you're going to say, well, he's going to need a walker. He's going to need rehabilitation. Well, with that in mind, you do not want to put the IV in the hand or in the wrist or in the crook of the arm. That patient needs to ambulate and he needs to be comfortable. We need to provide a positive experience for this patient. Now, with that in mind, I want to put that IV right in the forearm. That in itself is going to introduce another challenge. Okay? Now, in 2013, Chow and Associates concluded that African Americans and patients who are heavily tattooed can present with decreased vein visibility. You will not be able to see that vein as easily. Okay? Now, with that in mind, what we want to do is bring up that vein. How do we do that? Well, in 1999, Obamalu and Banerjee suggest the use of Benadine. All you have to do is stroke the vein downward with Benadine and it will bring up the vein. The light of the skin will change. And now, what I have found is the use of alcohol. That also works. Okay? Now, what if you still cannot visualize this vein? What you're going to have to do, you're going to have to palpate. Remember that vein that I don't like? What you do is you palpate all the way up. You feel for that vein with your forefinger as you go, and you will find that ideal location for your patient. Now, there's another factor that we need to consider. There are patients who have not had any experience with hospitals or IVs. Those patients can be pretty apprehensive about the whole situation. Now, a study done by Jacobson and Winslow in 2005 state that psychosocial factors can also come into play when you're inserting your IV. Now, we have an anxious patient right here. What are we going to do about it? Well, the use of warm blankets can relax your patient. Walk away for a few minutes, come right back. Another trick, use a warm, moist towel and wrap that extremity. The warmth will relax the patient and dilate that vein, which is what you're going to need. What else can we do? Well, instruct the patient to deep breathe and exhale. Especially exhale when you're inserting that stick, okay? Forewarn them. Let them know when that discomfort is going to happen, and let them know it's going to be transient. It's going to be very brief, okay? Just explain to your patient what you're going to do. Now, IV insertion is one of the most widely practiced invasive techniques for registered nurses. From my experience, I've learned that these common factors can affect IV insertion. They can be the procedure itself, the length of stay, the color of the patient's skin, and that anxiety factor all come into play, and they can all affect the success or the failure of your IV insertion. Now, we can appreciate many challenges when we are inserting that IV, okay? Now, do you remember that statistic that I quoted at the beginning of the presentation? How many successful IV attempts? It was 77%. I dare you to do better.